So I'm Suzanne Conklin Akbari, and it's my pleasure, and I'm very grateful to be here as a helper for the third annual Munsee Story Evening. The title of this gathering is NEEKAAWA, KIHTAACHIIMUWAK, WULAAKWUNUWII. This evening they tell stories. This is our third annual story night. This year in 2024, I'm really happy that we have storytellers both from Munsee-Delaware Nation and from Eelunaapeewi Lahkeewiit, or Delaware Nation at Moraviantown. There's going to be Ian McCallum, Velma Noah Nicholas, and Kristin Jacobs, along with illustrator Ella Johnston. So without any further delay, let me please ask Ian to start things off. Anishik.
Anishik, Suzanne, much appreciated and much appreciated to share space with uh, the wonderful speakers here as well as the wonderful artists. So thanks again for the invite to come back. And welcome everyone to the Munsee-Delaware Story Evening, the third annual. And it's my duty to start off in terms of the story sharing. This story was touched upon last year, was introduced in terms of just a conversation about how the translation process was going. So I have the pleasure of sharing a bit more of this story this evening as it's becoming, as it's progressing to being complete. And the story is called the Kiss of the First Snow. And this is a story that was given by the Nicholas family of Munsee-Delaware Nation. And I'm pleased to have with me Ella Johnston, who's a member of the Munsee-Delaware Nation as well, who is going to be sharing the artistic process of illustrating this story. The Kiss of the First Snow originally came out of our online Lenape language classes, which Karen and I hosted from 2020 to 2022. And in those classes, many Munsee people from south of the lakes were able to join in, and three members of the Nicholas family were able to join in, and they learned the language along with Karen and I teaching the language. And at the end of that time with those language classes, and I think it was actually the first story night or potentially the second one, John Nicholas decided that he wanted to see if I could translate a story. And I didn't ask a whole lot about it because I felt quite honored in that John would reach out. Based on the stories that I shared from my family, the Logan family of Munsee-Delaware, I felt really honored that John would reach out. Little did I realize that John was handing me a 10-page story, which is a bit of a challenge, especially if you're not a first language speaker, not a second language speaker. So it's a bit like being asked, to do 10 pages of French, which I think I could do a lot easier. It's going to take some time. And this all sort of encapsulated what I think I was trying to do by sharing family stories, was that there's a lot of stories in the community, and they're often related in English, or parts of them are related in Munsee. And I thought, if there's any way in which I could translate stories for other families into the language as best I could, I thought maybe we're doing that repatriation, that reconciliation process that we describe here in Canada, of taking something that came from Munsee speakers, had to be recorded in English because of the state of the language, and then brought back into the language. And I thought, in a small way, what we're doing here is we're actually reconciling between the languages here in Ontario and Canada, at least, and doing a good thing by bringing those stories back into the proper language. So as a yearly goal of translating and recording Munsee-Delaware community stories, if there were stories that people would like translated, I sort of put my own personal work aside in terms of language, and tried to sort of increase my own abilities with the language to translate these stories. It's taken the better part of 2 years to translate a 10-page story. I think maybe I've got to do a better job in the future in terms of outlining exactly what I'm capable of doing. But in the end, it was completed in December of 2023. And as soon as I typed the last word, I wanted to just the balloons and the streamer should have come down from the roof, but there wasn't any. And I was like, who do I tell? I got to tell someone who's finished 10 pages of translation of the Munsee language. But it was just me and the cat, so the cat got to hear about it. But it's only after that I've been able to share this sort of this mini Everest in terms of language translation. I was fortunate enough to win a grant with the United Way of Middlesex Elgin County, which is in southwestern Ontario, to record and illustrate and create short films regarding community story. So all of the community stories from previous years here at the Princeton IAS evening have now been illustrated, but they've also been filmed. So learners will be able to get to hear the language both in English and in Munsee, but they're actually, illustrated stories as well. And that's where I've got to meet Ella Johnston, who's here this evening, and she'll share her interpretation of the story through visual. A little bit about the translation process. As many of you may know, if you've taken part in any Indigenous language work, the Munsee-Lenape-Delaware language is a very descriptive language, meaning oftentimes you can get away with less words than you would in English to describe the same thing. But for a second language speaker and a learner, this is sort of the process in which I approached John's story. So I identified any nouns in the sentence, which probably goes back to me having to learn French, right? Look for words that you can identify quite easily. That way I can translate or start to get the gist of what the Delaware sentence is going to look like. Identify any subjects or verbs, and what I'll do there is I'll try to conjugate those as well. That was a part that I struggled with in the French language. I wasn't very, very good with my conjugations. I look at a piece of writing in English and okay, how is this going to be a challenge for me to translate into Munsee? Because English can sometimes get very wordy in the way that we write or the way that we speak, in ways that perhaps the Munsee language is not going to be an easy translation. Then I sort of delve into the world of, can I look for synonyms for words that aren't going to be present? Can I rewrite the sentence into something that is less English while staying true to the actual story? Then I go back to my sources. So I'll review with Mr. O'Meara's dictionary. The work of Ives Goddard has been very helpful. And also we have a curriculum guidebook here in Ontario that helps teachers of the Lenape language break down sentences. So I can also use that grammar text. The other piece that's really important is everybody needs a break. And sometimes rather than get so frustrated and mark up my computer with highlighter, I'll just leave that sentence and go on to the next one. And it's a practice that we teach, students in school. If you're having difficulty with this problem, go on to the next one, and hopefully you can come back to it if time allows at the end. Pardon me, I've got to close my window here. So there we go. So here's an example. And I've not necessarily shared this in the past, so I thought this might be interesting this evening. This translation, this is a simple sentence of the story. So in terms of an English, in terms of reading it in English, but as time went on, and as beautiful as it was, the creatures found it pretty tiresome to wake up time after time in a world that never changed. And from an English standpoint, that looks fairly simple. But for someone who's trying to translate that, there's some fairly English wordy things going on here. So, but as time went on, the term went, the term to go, may be misconstrued when I translate that into Munsee. The word for creatures means in English everything, right? So that may require me to extend the sentence to describe creatures. We use the thing time after time. It's sort of an expression in English, right? Time after time. Cyndi Lauper sang it time after time, but it's not necessarily very helpful in Lenape, and I'm not sure, although I translated it as such, that people would have said it like that. The other part that's tricky is world. Aki is earth, but I'm not sure if there's a word for world. So there had to be a way to get around that piece. So what I've taken there is the sentence that John recorded in his story, and now I've had to include workarounds to make sure that the original meaning of the sentence is there. So I did include Lapi, Wak Lapi, which is time after time. I guess I could use that for Cyndi Lauper as well. As instead of when time went on, I used this expression was just Sakiloit, which means as time goes by, I think it was. The part before I read, I have to acknowledge a couple of things. One is that I have a second language voice, which means that you're going to be missing some things. But it does allow me to consider some key pieces when it comes to my second language learning and how I'm going to improve as a speaker. Things that I'm going to think about is the fluency and the orality in which I speak. So, what's my fluency rate, my punctuation, my tone, and my flow. When I speak in English, my voice varies. It goes up and down because that's my first language. When I speak in French, it's less so, but I still understand the whole notion of tone and flow of a sentence. With the Munsee language, I'm going to argue that I'm not there yet. So that my recording of the Munsee language is very monotone and without that emotion that you would expect from a first language speaker. I will employ some problem solving into vocabulary that I've not used very often or seen. And that's oftentimes what we use in English or when we're trying to learn a second language, is that we'll go back and repeat a word, or we will go back to accent properly where the long vowel is or the short vowel is. And there are Munsee rules and there's English rules. And when you work in English for 99.999% of your time, oftentimes you will miss out on those specific Munsee rules, especially when it comes to the short vowels, the use of the letter X, or the exclamation on the second set of double vowels in a word. All of these things, I'm going to give myself a break though, and I always share with those who are learners, that we should do this as well. That people are shy when they speak in their own first language, not alone choosing to speak in a second language. There's a fair bit of anxiety as well when you're in front of a large group, whether you're online. It's 56 people now, so I should be fairly anxious. But when we speak in front of groups or speak in front of those that might be better speakers, we get some anxiety. We're afraid of judgment. We're also afraid that we're going to go against the rules, that perhaps we're not saying something as the way it should be. There's a piece that I am working towards, and that's conversing in a second language and having the stamina in reading a second language, because oftentimes I get tired. Just as I do when I translate, I need a break. It's almost like I need a break just to clear my mind, and then I can come back. It's the same way in conversing in a second language, that I need to be able to build up that stamina. So instead of, talking in 10 minutes in English on story night, I talk for 10 minutes in the Munsee language. We do have the historical trauma of being and speaking, and what's that meant for different generations. So that refers directly to the residential schools in which the language was banned, but that also includes the 60s scoop, and other pieces where, just meaning speaking the language would center you out as someone who's not speaking the two main languages here in Canada, which is English and French. Therefore, in 2024, I always encourage my learners to speak, read, and hear the language. It's a strength. And with that, it's political, because you are choosing to give power to your Indigenous language, the language of your people. And with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share parts of John's story. I don't want to give it all away because the story is yet to be published, and we got to find a way to bring you back next year. So this is excerpts from The Kiss of the First Snow. I'm not going to read the English. The English is very clear on the slide, so I'm going to concentrate on the Munsee language, much as my colleagues online are. So here it goes. Lawate and Aki West Seat. Chachpanak Wasowat Wag Pashikitali. Lawate Iasqua NEEKAAWA Atmobilawak Nashilat Machine Wak Shuk Kishkwik Kishkwet shihsuwanakuw. And the taskbar is right over the last sentence. Here we go. Lunaapeewiwak, NEEKAAWA shukmata kweli wak NEEKAAWA chechpinakwasoat alawi kwaikishkwi. Eelunaapeewi witawasamalewak awayayusa kasino wak KIHTAACHIIMUWAK. NEEKAAWA kweli palanisawak. Gwitanum laachumohkawaatwak. Mata wasikan wak mata nipahampastak. Nalahii mata pishkak. Wema awayayusak wingalawa sowa. Kishok yani wasalachin wak yani alume waehleewak. Shuksakalowit wak pishkatale. Wema wang kishawalomwa okilat lapi wak mata chechpinakwasitit. As Ishkwik, Wakchlak, Walak. And it is with my pleasure to pass the virtual microphone over to my colleague in this story, Ella Johnston, to describe the artistic process. Ella.
Nishik Ian. So I'm in the middle of illustrating this story with Ian. The first photo you see is one of the last scenes in the story. I'm still in the middle of it, so it's just a sketch. And there should be on the next slide or more closer to the finished copy. So the process, we started with a storyboard where me and Ian and some of the other people who were working on the story, we did a written descriptive storyboard. We blocked out the story and picked what parts we found important or that we felt needed to be illustrated. And then I did a visual storyboard. Then the visual storyboard turned into the sketches and final drawings. Material wise, I went with painting because I felt like it fit the story better. And this one, first thing that came to mind was the perspective I did it in. I wanted to do a bird's eye view so you could see the wind and the snow, the creatures, and then if you can see, there's a face in the wind, which is supposed to represent the creator. This one, I really want to focus on the window more than anything. For these ones, I chose a lot of red to represent the people. So they all have red surrounding them or they're wearing red. Just kind of differentiate those scenes from the ones with the creatures. Anishik?
Ella.
Wamo wen, the pitch canal lomwa. Anishik, see you again soon.
Nishik.
Loma.
Apachkanawalokwa.